It appears that I ought to begin by thanking you for so many of you coming out and braving these bitter, frigid, cold temperatures. Did you say 1 degree? As high as 3? That's kind of what I found also. And I'm really glad you're here this morning, and Susan and I are really thankful that you've allowed us to come and be a part of your assemblies this morning. Thankful for Phil being willing to share his pulpit and for the leadership of this congregation allowing us to come and spend a moment with you. I know you're accustomed to elaborate PowerPoints, and I too prefer PowerPoints, but somehow this morning I thought maybe we would try it without that. That maybe we'd go back to the old-fashioned way and see how we could get along without that for a moment. I know you're starting this series on the Sermon on the Mount, and I told Phil that I would kind of continue with his introduction. Some say it is the greatest sermon ever preached. I think that's probably true. Some say it's the thesis statement of Jesus, his statement about what kingdom living ought to really be. Perhaps that's true also. Some say it's so profound, and it's radical, a radical departure from how we would normally live. I think you'll find that to be true as you make your way through this lesson. And somehow this morning I wish, though it's not possible, I wish I could erase from your mind for a moment everything you've ever known about this sermon. And what I wish is I could transport you and myself back to the side of that hill, and that each of us could look into the eyes of Jesus and listen to what he would say. For I suspect you would look to the right and you would look to the left and you would find people who are what you and I might call downtrodden. People who are a bit discouraged with life. People are wondering what the future would hold. Now I've been told over the years that a really good speech has an attention-getting introduction. And I have been told that it has a really powerful closing so that it kind of stamps in your mind the memory of that speech. And then, of course, in between the introduction and the closing, you have these statements of importance. If that's the criteria for a really good speech, this is a really good speech. For listen to how Jesus introduces this message that you and I call the Sermon on the Mount. He looks out into the eyes of these people, and over again, he uses this word, blessed. Or we say blessed. Blessed are you. And blessed are you. Blessed are you. Can you almost feel people looking to the right and to the left and wondering, who is he talking about? And he adds to that and he says, blessed are you who mourn. And blessed are you who are poor in spirit. And blessed are the merciful. And blessed are the peacemakers. And blessed are the persecuted. How does that work? And he adds words even more like this. For you will be comforted, and you will receive mercy. And you will be called the sons of God, and you will inherit the earth. Then it seems to me that he closes all that by saying, do you know how important you are? In my kingdom, do you really know how important you are? You are do you remember? The light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. You're like this city, and it's up there on top of a hill, and all the lights are shining, and that's what you're going to be like. Now, I wonder if those words get your attention at all. If this is the greatest speech and the greatest sermon ever given, would that get your attention? And the closing? Do you know that he closes with 4 illustrations? And the last one you talked about at the end of your lesson last week, he talked about a wise person and a foolish person. And he said, the wise person, that's the one that builds their house on a rock foundation. And the foolish person builds on this foundation of sand. And you know what? Rains always come. And winds always blow. And streams always rise. But the house on the rock, is the one that stands. How do you know the difference between the wise and the foolish? Well, whoever hears these words that I've been saying and puts them into practice, that's the difference. But right above that, he says this, not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Only he who does, do you remember? The will of my Father. And there are going to be a lot of people who will say to me in that day, well, Lord, in your name did we not prophesy? And in your name did we not do all these many wonderful works? And I'm going to say, depart from me because I never knew you, or you didn't know me. What is the will of the Father? I mean, I've heard that for years. People say, well, look at that person and look at these people and look at, and they're not doing the will. And we take it so out of context like we do so many other things. I find myself wondering, is the will of the Father inside this sermon? If you really want to know what God wants, is it inside this sermon? And right above that, another illustration in the closing. There are 2 roads. There are 2 roads. One is broad. It must be easy to travel because everybody's on it. And you just keep going down this broad road with all the other people. But in the end, here's what happens. It is destruction. But the other road, narrow though it be, only a few people on it. If you would dare to walk on that narrow road, it would lead you to life, and abundant life and eternal life. And how would I know the difference between a broad road and a narrow road? Could it be in the words of this sermon? And even above that, one more illustration. 2 kinds of trees. You remember that? One tree brings forth good fruit. Another tree brings forth bad fruit. You'll know the tree by its fruit. I know he's talking about life, and I know he's talking about fruit that comes from me. And how do I know the difference between good and bad? Would it be, could it possibly be in the words of this sermon? So you see how Jesus lays it out? He grabs our attention and says, you are so very, very important. And they've never probably felt important in all their lives. And he closes it with all these illustrations. And what does he say in between? And no, I'm not going to try to cover everything in between, but I want to give you kind of a thought about it. He'll say things like, you know, it's been said for a long, long time, you should not kill. We know that's a good law. And that law was written in some stone way long time ago. And most people heed that law. A few don't, but most people do. But in my kingdom, I don't even want you to talk about people badly. I don't want you to call people names that kind of make them look less than they are supposed to look. I think, wow, is that doing the will of the Father? Is that walking the narrow road that leads to life? Is that bearing good fruit? And he will say, you know what? It's been said for a long, long time. You shouldn't commit adultery. Well, that's a pretty good law, isn't it? Think of all the pain and all the suffering and all the heartache that comes because of adultery. But in my kingdom, I don't even want you to lust. I want you to be careful about the lust thing. Because if you'll be careful about the lust thing, you'll never get to the adultery thing. Does that seem hard to you? Narrow road, good fruit, doing the will of the Father, building your house on a rock. And you know what you've also heard for a long, long time? You should love your neighbors, but it's okay to hate your enemies. And that kind of feels right to me. Doesn't it feel kind of right to you? But in my kingdom, I want you to love your enemies. Now, I know when you get to that and you talk about it, you'll be careful with that. That doesn't mean I run up and grab you and I hug you and I kiss you and I have this warm, loving feeling. Let me just tell you, in the New Testament, love is a behavior. Love is a behavior that you choose. A love is a behavior that is kind, Paul says, and it's patient. And it's not selfish, and it's not rude. And so Jesus will say toward your enemies, you know what I want you to do? I want you to pray for them. And I want you to do some good things for them. Is that what he means by doing the will of the Father? Is that what he means by walking the narrow road that leads to life? And I find, yeah, it is really, really profound. And it is really, really different. He doesn't stop there. He'll say, in my kingdom, it's about humility. It's really about humility. It's not doing religious things to be seen of men and getting someone to pat you on the back. My being here this morning and my speaking, obviously I want to do a good job. I don't want Brandon leaving thinking I've done a really poor job. But this is not about pats on the back. This is not what the kingdom is like. You don't do your good things so that people can see you and think, wow, look at them. And you don't get out on the street corner and pray really loudly so people say, whoa, look at them. Because in the kingdom of God, listen very carefully, it's not about you. It's about you glorifying the Father in heaven, and it's about you helping other people. But it's never been about you. Is that doing the will of the Father? Is that bringing forth good fruit? Is that walking the narrow road that's going to lead you to life abundant here on this earth and life eternal from now on? You know what else? My kingdom is about the heart. You know, you're going to learn that in this sermon series. My kingdom is about the heart. And I got to tell all of you, he's going to tell you that there's a wrestling match that goes on in the heart all the time. And in our hearts, we're so easily drawn to the things of this world. And we know that more money will buy more things, and so we're so caught up in that, are we not? And that's where you'll say, you know, your treasure and your heart are related. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And I got news for you. You cannot have both. You got to choose which one is going to be the master of your life. And in this kingdom of mine, Jesus is the king. Money's not the king. It's Jesus who is the king. You got to get that all kind of sorted out. Is that walking this narrow road? Is that the life that brings good fruit? Is that building my house on a foundation so that it's not going to be shaken by the things of this world and the temptations of Satan? And he says, all the things of this world that we get so caught up in, not just money, but things of this world we get caught up so much in, we worry about it. Where we're going to live. You know, our son this morning, before church or after church or both, he'll be out in negative 14-degree wind chill with an axe in certain places, and he'll be breaking ice so cattle can get a drink of water. Thankfully, most have live streams and where they can get to the water and so forth. But there'll be a few, and there'll be a few automatic waters he has to put heaters inside and all that again this morning. And I wonder how he slept last night, wondering if all would be okay. But that's kind of how we do it, isn't we? We get all consumed about the things that are going on in this life. What am I going to eat? And where am I going to live? And how? And we worry. Make ourselves miserable. Jesus says, you know what, my kingdom, you don't need to be doing that. You know, you can really be free from this because my kingdom is not only a kingdom of the heart, my kingdom is a kingdom of trust. My kingdom is where I learn how to put my trust in a Father whom he says later who really loves me. I watched this couple over here, and I watched those little grandchildren come around them, and I watched how they would take coats off and how they would rub the head, and I watched how they're loving those children. And they really know how to love those children. But your Father knows so much more. So put your trust there and quit this worrying. That's the narrow road that leads to life. That's the good fruit. That's building your house where it ought to be built. Does that make any sense to you, Mon? This is some kind of a sermon, isn't it? This is a powerful sermon. And he's not finished. He says, by the way, I want you to be careful about this deal of judging people. You ever heard this statement that baseball is the American pastime? Used to be, at least. That's not true. I think judging other people is the favorite American pastime. It is so easy to look across and say, look what they just did, or look what they're thinking, or look how they're living, or look at this. If they could just be like me. And Jesus says, whoa, wait a minute. No. Let me slow you down on that one too. Why don't you, before you take care of Stephen, why don't you take care of yourself? Before I try to correct Stephen or Andy, why don't you look at your own life? Now, you're not going to like this. But you know what you may find? You've got a huge problem compared to what you're looking at in their lives. So let's stop that kind of stuff. You are going to be the light of the world. You're going to be the salt of the earth. If you really ever get what I mean by my kingdom, if you ever really understand that I am the king and live like I say to live, I'm going to tell you things are going to be really, really different for your life and for the lives of others. And when you get this, it can be 1 degree outside and people are going to come and they're going to want to see. And they're going to be with these people who are so radically, radically different. A friend of mine, I think he's probably 80 years old right now, winningest baseball coach in collegiate history. 15 years at Lubbock Christian National Championship, 23 years at Texas Tech. Loves softball also. His son Shannon came here to play at Oklahoma Christian. Left Colorado Christian without a coach. Larry goes up to Denver and says, I'll just fill in. He said, Ken, that crazy president made me interview. He said, after all these years, he made me interview. He looked at me and he said, do you believe that God created the world? And Larry said, yes, I kind of think I believe that. He said, do you believe the greatest sermon ever preached was the Sermon on the Mount? And Larry said, yes, I believe that. And he said, do you think the second greatest sermon ever preached might have been one by a man named Peter in Acts chapter 2? And Larry said, I can agree with that one. He said, President looked across at me and said, now don't you teach anything else while you're on this campus. Larry said, I got it. He's still coaching women's softball and loves it. Greatest sermon ever preached. But I've been hearing it all my life. I've been hearing it all my life. Have you? Have you? Could it be possible this time around, as Phil so eloquently deals with these various things that are taught, could it be that we decide to take it really seriously, even enough to put it into practice? Great, great congregation. Great congregation. Everybody knows Memorial Road. Only it's destined by this series of lessons to be greater. You see, we are people who are supposed to be born into the kingdom, and we're supposed to live like kingdom people, and we're supposed to stay in the kingdom. While we stand and sing.